Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of Development Plan Panel. My name is Councillor Annie Maloney and I'll be chairing today's meeting. The meeting is being live streamed on the City Council YouTube channel so that the public can observe the meeting without needing to be present. Could I now invite members and officers to introduce themselves? If we could please start on my left. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Martin Elliott. I'm Head of Strategic Planning.
Hello, Caroline Harris, Principal Planner.
Councillor Jules Cecilwood, representing Wheatwood Ward and Chair of City Plans.
Councillor Paul Ray, Chair of South and West Plans Panel.
Afternoon, everybody. I'm Councillor Mary Harland, representing Kippax and Methley, and here as Cabinet Member for Housing.
Councillor Kayleigh Brooks, and I'm substituting for Councillor Pryor today.
Councillor Penny Stables, Ward Councillor in Wetherby.
Councillor Alan Lamb, another Ward Councillor from Wetherby.
I'm Robert Finnegan. I'm a councillor that covers the Morley North Ward.
Hello everyone, I'm Councillor Colin Campbell.
Good afternoon, Councillor Barry Anderson, Adlan Warfield Ward.
Good afternoon, Toby Russell, Clerk to the panel.
Good afternoon, Neil Weeks from Legal Services.
Good afternoon, David Feeney, Chief Planning Officer.
Hello, Adam Harvat, Group Manager of Policy and Plans.
Thank you very much. Moving to the agenda, can the clerk run through the first 5 formal items, please?
Yep, thank you, Chair. So, item number 1, we have no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Item number 2, we have no items which would require the exclusion of the press or the public. Item number 3, we have no formal late items. Item number 4 is interest, so can I ask members to declare any interest they may have?
I declare I am a member of Morley Town Council's Planning Committee.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Finnegan. And item number 5 is apologies. So apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Jonathan Pryor with Councillor Kayleigh Brooks acting as substitute. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Item number 6, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 16th of September 2025. Do members accept these are a true and correct record? Excellent. I'll take that. That's all good. And any matters arising from the minutes?
Thank you, Chair. So just on the item that was considered last time around the spatial development framework on page 13 of your papers, that is a joint development plan document called the Spatial Development Framework, aimed at supporting the delivery of a mass rapid transit route across West Yorkshire. It's joint with the other 4 local authorities. It's being progressed in terms of its governance through a joint committee, and that joint committee met last Friday, the 23rd of January, and they approved the initial consultation of early scoping document, which sets the detail of the policies to be addressed and the themes to be addressed. So at the moment there are no policies. It's very headline consultation, really setting out at a high strategic level what this document is about. Members previously have been briefed on what the document's about, but unfortunately, due to the timings of these meetings, it wasn't possible to bring that detail of what was agreed at the Joint Committee to Development Plan panel. The public consultation will take place between the 29th of January to the 12th of March. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We'll go straight into agenda item number 7, revised draft national planning policy framework. Who's got a presentation?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I'm going to take you through this report. I'll canter through the presentation just because it only serves as a summary of the report. But I just wanted to sort of highlight some elements. The presentation goes in the order of the report, which in itself went in the order of the MPPF itself. So it's not in order of any priority or anything like that. Just wanted to highlight that before we begin. Sorry, just let me, there we go. So yes, as members will now know, the revised MPPF, which landed just before Christmas on the 16th of December, represents a substantial change to national policy, and certainly in the planning press it's being called the most substantial change to national planning policy since the NPPF's inception in 2012. It has a number of kind of keynote features, and the kind of most obvious one, which strikes you, is the separation of plan-making policies from decision-making policies in the structure of the document itself. And that is designed to provide a very clear steer to local authorities in both of those processes, and has not been kind of utilised before, certainly in the NPPF. So there are clear implications for local plans, because local plans are expected to prioritise a strategic vision, allocations, but not to replicate what's set out in national decision-making policies, which is described as a rules-based approach, which provide a clear framework for decision-making. So, in terms of the sort of the next section of the NPPF goes through kind of plan-making policies, and as I say, the emphasis is on streamlined local plans, which focus on the strategic vision for an authority and its allocations, with locally specific policies where national policies aren't sufficient. There are also updated tests of soundness, and members will recall that at the end of the plan-making process, the plan is tested against a series of tests of soundness, and those have been slightly rejigged to introduce justified rather than justified, and realistic rather than effective. I think largely they remain the same sort of sphere of test, but there is an interesting change in the emphasis there. A big shift is that quantitative standards are limited through the draft NPPF. It makes quite clear that the expectation that local plans will cover issues such as infrastructure, affordable housing, parking and design, but that there should be no overlap with other national standards, which should be taken as read. And it's anticipated that that will have an impact on the Leeds local plan, but other local plans across the country too. There's also quite a lot of references to the spatial development strategy, which is a regional document that provides a strategic regional vision for the area, and that new plans should be at SDS. And yeah, as I say, overall, the scope of local plans has been reduced, or is proposed to be reduced through this. I'll just briefly touch on the decision-making policies. They're not the report as it sets out doesn't go through in detail on the decision-making policies aspects, because it's obviously a very long document, and the emphasis of this report was on the local plan implications. But it's obviously worth being aware that it does introduce a series of standardised decision-making policies, which are designed to be used for planning applications and for appeals. And that inevitably does result in a reduction in local discretion in terms of decision-making, because local policies where they conflict with the new national policy will be given very limited weight, unless they were adopted after, or at least against, this new framework. So the expectation is that approvals will be quicker where proposals are in conformity with the new NPPF and local plan policies. In terms of the next chapter of achieving sustainable development, much of this remains the same, and the emphasis remains the same in terms of applications being approved where they represent sustainable development. And yet the emphasis here, it should not be refused unless adverse effects substantially outweigh the benefits of a scheme. And the real focus here is development within settlements. The next emphasis is with housing near railway stations. This is within settlements. And again, explicit support for this, with also increased densities, rather minimum densities set, which again, a policy L3 sets out what that density is, which is most likely to be higher than the current densities in many of Leeds' settlements. Climate emergency or climate change elements of the plan, local national policy have been moved up within the order of the document. It's clear that the schemes that contain energy efficient measures and low carbon energy within a plan and application should be given substantial positive weight. There's also the impact on the local plan, where it's expected that the way that a local plan will deal with climate change, largely through embedding sustainable patterns of development, but also through the design code, which I'll come on to a little bit later too. There's also some interesting changes about how a development is expected to consider the lifetime of its climate impact. And also, I think further work is necessary, I think, from us as officers to better understand the impacts on things like whole life carbon assessments, which I think members will recall was a major part of previous versions of the local plan. Regarding the supply of housing, much remains the same as was, and the government reaffirms its commitment to the standard method. Previously, it was judged as a sort of starting point, whereas now it's given even heightened weight. That makes that doesn't represent a change for Leeds, we've used the standardised method for some time now anyway. Affordable housing policy really places a heightened emphasis on the delivery of social rent housing and deprioritises first homes as a product, which I think is certainly consistent with what we've wanted to do and what is reflected in our up-to-date evidence in the SHMA, which makes very clear our need for social rented across communities in Leeds. What's interesting as well, the government have created a new category of what are called medium sites, which is 10 to 49 units of about 2.5 hectares as well. Through a local plan, we would be expected that 10% of our sites, or the cumulative amount of our allocations, were on such size sites. There's also a question within the consultation about whether sites such as that, to help further encourage SME builders, would be essentially removed from the requirement to provide on-site affordable housing, but instead make contributions off-site instead. That's an important note as well, because I think for members who've read through the draft NPPF, there are further proposals within the consultation material, not in the actual text itself. And that's one of those examples where a question is raised through the consultation but isn't actually within the draft text. There's another major one as well, which I'll alert you to a bit later on. So yeah, in terms of local plan alignment, I think we feel that there's a lot of linkages there that are still consistent with what we were proposing through the local plan. There are some policy elements, such as co-living and rural workers housing, that we may no longer need policies on. And that's a consistent theme across this, really. If we applied the wording of this proposal or proposed NPPF, there are elements now of our local plan that we won't need to cover. Just quickly, the main emphasis, I think, on the building a strong and effective economy is on kind of the role of data centres and support for those, and that plans should be really geared towards that strategic economic growth, provided that negative impacts of such can be minimised. Likewise, for ensuring the vitality of town centres, a lot of this remains as was, just drafted slightly differently, but with a much more emphasis on intensification of residential uses within town centres. That's largely been part of local policy already. We still encourage housing within centres at the moment, above ground floor at least. What's also interesting is that members who've dealt with retail applications will be familiar with the sequential test. That within the consultation material, the question is raised as to whether that works, is effective, and whether that should be removed entirely. That's not in the draft document. The draft document retains the sequential test. That's an interesting kind of wrinkle between the two documents. So I think it'd be certainly interesting to hear members' views on those aspects, as all of it, of course. Telecommunications has its own section 2. Again, policies are expected to promote digital connectivity with minimal environmental and visual impact, which is similar to current, but with a greater emphasis, I think, at the moment. It's not considered that the telecommunications aspects will have a huge impact on the local plan, as we weren't entirely there wasn't much of a plan to include it anyway. The next section, securing clean energy and water. Again, a real emphasis here on kind of consolidating the policy framework to ensure that we're making the most benefits of energy generation, storage and heat networks through new development. As I said previously, I think the role of the local plan is largely around patterns of development, but there's also that co-location of resources such as this. We're expected through the local plan to identify areas that are appropriate for renewable energy. Members will remember we already do that in the previous version of the local plan, so we propose to continue to do that. What it doesn't do, though, is require us to allocate land for renewable energy. So there's a bit of a difference there. It's more a signalling where we think such proposals would be appropriate. I think the main thing to say in terms of minerals is the last bullet there, which is about previously in the current MPPF, shallow and deep mine coal is listed as a mineral of national and local importance. We've always felt that contradicted the authority's climate aspirations, and so through the local plan have proposed to not seek out sites for that. So I think it's welcome that in the new MPPF they're removed as a resource of national and local importance, but other aggregates still are, such as sand and gravel, which clearly we need a healthy supply of, not least for construction. The next section is in protecting greenbelt land. I think probably the most advertised change to the MPPF is the one on the top bullet point, where support is given for development within a reasonable walking distance of train stations, and the change there is through essentially assessing that such development will not represent not inappropriate development in the greenbelt. And this has the potential to release large amounts of land across the country and in Leeds for housing. As part of such development, there's also an increased requirement for the delivery of affordable housing. It's quite a complicated arrangement that's been proposed, but it's essentially an uplift on what is already in your local plan of around 15%, with a ceiling of 50%. Grain belt tests remain largely unchanged, although there is one change to what's called the footnote 7 test, which is removed, which makes will make, I think, quite a significant impact on assessing land to be in grey belt. But we'll have to see how that plays out, I think, as we do further assessment work. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I think there is a heightened emphasis placed on design through the document, and it really does, I think, hammer home the importance of design coding, and I think that's where a lot of the quality policies are going to need to be, and that's clearly what the MPPF's intention is to be. So I think in many respects we may need to retool elements of the local plan. That people remember we had a chapter on placemaking. Some of that may have to be relocated to a design code, and it's worth noting as well, it's not in the paper. Since that time, there's a new PPG on design and placemaking, which is also out for consultation until the 10th of March. My understanding, and colleagues will correct me if I'm wrong on this one, is that it's largely a repackaging of existing guidance. I don't think it represents a step change. It's more about trying to bring existing guidance together under two covers. But yeah, I think just the other thing to point out there is that substantial weight is given to good design, and development proposals that are not well designed should be refused. Okay, I'll canter through the rest of it. But yeah, so further chapter on promoting sustainable transport. I think the real thing for the local plan here is on the national connectivity tool. It really helps use a standardised methodology for us to assess sites, that there is a national tool that's out there that can be viewed by everybody. So it creates a transparency and level of robustness, which I think is very welcome. And as it says, active travel and parking restraint is encouraged in well-connected areas. I think an area that's getting sort of heightened attention as well is that about healthy communities. It's very clear from the draft NPPF that there is a real expectation that local plans will have a kind of give greater weight to the provision of community facilities and have a better understanding of necessary infrastructure as part of the local plan. In regards to flood risk, not much has changed, but as detailed in the paper, there is a slight re-emphasis there in terms of moving away from avoiding risk to minimising risk. And I think we will need to sort of do a bit further work to understand the practical implications of that in decision making and the local plan, not least on a day such as today. It kind of rams home the importance of robust flood risk policy and development in the right area. But yeah, it does appear to be a bit of a shift in emphasis there from avoiding to minimising. Just to say I've combined conserving natural and historic environments. They are two separate chapters in the NPPF. Again, BNG, which members will be well aware of, is kind of more strongly reintegrated into the national policy, but also discussions about balancing conservation with other positives as well. It's clear, I think the heritage policy is probably looking for a more flexible approach to bringing forward buildings where the other public benefits can be attached to a scheme. And I think finally, the real impact on the local plan will be again on design coding, which is expected to identify heritage kind of assets and how they should be integrated into new developments. So if that wasn't enough, we've also got some long annexes and technical material as well. I'm not going to go through these in any great detail, but they are all important in their own right. I think the most important part is kind of policy weight in Annex A, which makes very clear that very limited weight should be given to any local policies that conflict with the new national planning policy framework when it's adopted. So right now, that's not an issue, but on adoption of the new national planning policy framework, policies that conflict with it, and the wording I think is in any way inconsistent, which is quite strong wording, they'll be given very limited weight in decision making. There's also an awful lot of viability guidance in Annex B, which I think is trying to face in two directions in terms of make it very clear the kind of exceptions where viability tests can be used through an application process, but also places greater responsibility on local authorities to make clear what we will expect to be delivered through development through developer contributions. There's also viability kind of guidance on what are called the golden rules, which is the development I talked about earlier that's in the green belt that delivers a heightened amount of affordable housing. There are some viability related get outs related to that. And finally, there's some additional information regarding housing and green belt assessments as well. So just to reiterate, the consultation ends on the 10th of March. As the paper details, there won't be another development plans panel until that time. So we're very grateful today to capture your comments that will help feed into our response. And we've committed to sharing a draft of our response to members via email for comment before we submit it under the Chief Planner's delegated powers in consultation with the executive member. And yes, just to say, yes, it does represent a substantial and significant change to national policy, which does have implications for the Leeds local plan. And I will stop sharing there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. That was a lot of information. Just to let members know, I actually don't have my glasses on today. So if you do want to ask a question, please do quite a big wave and I'll try my very best to get around to everyone. Have any questions? Thank you very much. I'll start with Councillor Finnegan and then Councillor Campbell.
Yeah, when is it likely the MPPF or the new MPPF to be adopted? Because clearly that might be relevant. Part of 43 talks about development around stations, and it talks about if you're near a station. People will know the White Rose station is right in the middle of Greenbelt in Morley. It was put back into Greenbelt after it was taken out of Greenbelt by the City Council, but it was put back in following legal challenge, presumably because of its proximity. We should start waving a white flag on that. I don't know if the City Council is inclined to do that, but it is clearly close. But a lot of the sites that have been proposed for the Morley area are down the Dewsbury corridor, which are certainly within 15 minutes or so of walking. Certainly the green fields that are above the White Rose would bring those in. So again, do we wave a white flag on those that are presently in the green belt? Do we have any opportunity to resist such developments should this plan be ultimately adopted? And para 73 talks about GB8 golden rules right at the end, sets 3 clear and limited circumstances where the use of site-specific viability assessment may be justified to enable development in the green belt. What are those 3 clear and limited circumstances? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Finnegan. In terms of when it's likely to be adopted, we don't know as a fact. I think there's going to be an awful lot of comments along. I would guess this year, but how soon this year, I wouldn't know. But certainly the intention of government is to adopt it as soon as possible. So I would guess later this year.
You can ask that question and submit our comments.
Yes, yeah, and that's something we can raise when we submit our comments. In terms of specific sites close to railway stations, I think you're right to pick up on this reasonable distance wording, which isn't defined. I think one of the comments that we would like to make back is that I think it'd be helpful for that to be defined, because, well, the standards that government use for other things for a good walking distance is 800 metres. So that's a 10-minute walk. So that's an assessment that's used previously. So I couldn't comment on whether that's what they're expecting, but that's certainly what's used in other kind of similar tests. I think it's a bit too soon for officers to be able to comment on whether individual plots of land are going to be supportable or refusable. It will come down to a lot of other factors that aren't in front of me right now. But clearly, the government are suggesting strong support for sites well connected to railway stations that have got a frequent service and are within a reasonable walking distance. So, but a lot of other site-related factors in terms of quality of design, as I took you through earlier, there are other factors that would allow the refusal of schemes on lots of other grounds if it wasn't in accordance with national policy. The Greenbelt policy is just one element of a decision-making framework, so there could be many other grounds for any individual scheme to be refused. And on the final question for Councillor, could you just take me through the paragraph again? Because I was...
73,
yeah.
GB8 golden rules set 3 clear and limited circumstances. What are they? Very last.
Yeah, no, I've got it.
Yeah, So what it says in GB8 itself, it says there's only 3 circumstances in which the site-specific viability assessment may be justified, and that is where the proposals on previously developed land, for a multi-phase strategic site, or for a development model which is of a wholly different type to that assumed in the viability assessment that informed the development plan.
Sorry, what does that mean?
Well, so it means that they could do a further site-specific viability assessment on a site which is previously developed. So at the local plan stage, we'll do a strategic viability assessment which will set the policy, and what it's saying is that you would only be allowed to challenge that and do a further site-specific viability assessment at planning application stage if the site was previously developed, if it was a multi-stage strategic site. So again, the definition of that's not there, but that would be a large site being developed in different phases. Or and it says for a development model which is a wholly different type to that assumed. So I guess if the development coming forward was for a completely different type of development to what was on the site, then they'd be maybe to be able to look at that. I guess if it was for a certain type of housing product, but
if it helps, Councillor Finnegan, just to say, I think what the government are doing here is they want the golden rules to stick. So they want an uplift in affordable housing. They don't expect developers to come forward with, well, we can't do it because it's not viable arguments. So in setting out the 3 circumstances where they would accept a viability argument, they're including things like brownfield land, where there might be a need to remediate that land and there might be abnormal costs.
Just to come back very briefly on that issue, those sound like 3 perfectly good excuses that any volume house builder could use to say, you know, the golden rules don't apply in this case.
And if I just come back on that, that's certainly something that we can lean into in our response, because we certainly think that delivering more affordable housing where there is land value to be captured is really important for the city.
Great, thank you. Councillor Campbell?
I've got a couple of general questions. Can I just follow up on that so I get it clear in my mind? So our plan will in effect designate viability over various areas. That will be the function of the plan.
So at a strategic level, local plans are already required to show that any sites that are allocated through it are capable of delivering the policies of the plan and national policy. So we have a strategic viability assessment that already does that. I think what this is doing is reasserting that requirement, I think requiring us to go into a greater level of detail in terms of the level of infrastructure that's going to be required through new development. And so setting that out as a framework. So that doesn't represent a major shift in what a local plan already has to do. The impact of that can mean, as an example in Leeds, is obviously we've got different affordability zones for the delivery of affordable housing, and that's related to viability. If the same evidence gone through at a new time showed similar impacts, that may affect viability, as you'd expect, because different parts of Leeds have got different levels of viability.
So, in effect, nothing's changing. I say this because we sit on city plans, and city plans is the worst, I think, for developers coming along and saying we can't afford to do this. You'll forgive me because the picture behind you is slightly out of sync with my movements, so if I move my hand it'll move in about 2 seconds. It's putting me off. So in effect, don't worry, I'll keep going, because I'm interested in it. I'm interested in it, and I know you're not. So in effect, what we have at the moment is that, particularly in the city centre, developers come along and say we can't afford to do this. In fact, every developer in the city centre I've ever met says we can't afford to do this, but that's by the by. So that won't change. They'll still be able to come along and say, city centre, for example. So the golden rule, which is, I think it's 5%, isn't it, in the city centre? 7, sorry, okay. Is only as good as the line in the plan. It's actually on the ground. We're still in this situation where you can come and argue.
So just to be clear, the golden rules apply to greenbelt land, so it's not a city centre test. One of the issues with city centre development, as you'll probably appreciate, is that a lot of the land that comes forward in the city centre hasn't been allocated through the plan. It's windfall development. So it hasn't been through a strategic viability assessment. So I think one of the concerns might be that it wouldn't be captured by this sort of test within national policy because, as Caroline read out and explained, it won't be in accordance with a viability assessment through an allocation process because those sites may never have been allocated in the first place because brownfield land has a presumption in favour anyway in sustainable locations. So I think what the government are trying to do is, as Martin said, strengthen the tests to ensure that if a local plan has allocated a site and made reasonable assumptions about viability, that if a very similar development comes forward in 2 or 3, 4, 5 years' time, there aren't really many excuses for a developer, certainly not the price they paid for the land, to be able to say, look, now we can't afford to do this anymore. I think it's going to be more challenging, and this is certainly something we can pull out in our responses, where it represents windfall sites that haven't been allocated through a plan. So I think perhaps that's an area that we could perhaps cover in our response. I don't know if Martin if wanted to. No.
Thank you, Councillor Lamb. Sorry, do you want to come back again?
Yes, please.
Briefly, please.
Well, I think this is fairly crucial, actually, as to what instructions we're given in relation to viability. There's greenbelt and viability, which are the ones that we're going to argue about. So we were always told by the district valuer that there was this presumption that the seller of land should be allowed to make I think you used to call it reasonable profit. How will that apply then in relation, if we're talking about greenbelt, and if we designated that swathe of greenbelt on the north of the city and around Morley as in effect we expect 50% affordables if we release land, how will that still be a criteria for assessing viability, the reasonable profit?
I think, Councillor Campbell, this MPPF doesn't significantly change the approach to viability that we use currently. We set that through the plan making process, and then we allow for individual viability cases to be heard on individual planning applications. But things like, as Adam said, the price paid for the land and the developer profit should be front loaded and expected. So I don't think this document really significantly shifts the approach we have at the moment. That said, what we can do through the Leeds local plan is we can start to be really clear about the parameters around viability, around the priorities that we place on different policies, particularly those that have a cost to developers, so that we can ensure that we have front-loaded to the best of our ability their ability to viably deliver the schemes that we want to see. Where it relates to the Greenbelt is about the expectation that government have, because these sites often tend to be of higher value, there is more value to be captured. So therefore there can be more policy attached to those sites. For example, in this case, seeking more affordable housing than we otherwise would have done.
Councillor Lamb.
Thank you, Chair. Just before I start this, is it in order to offer congratulations to Martin, given this is our first DPP since his... if I've gone out of order, I'll just pretend I never said it, but is that in order? Yes. Yes, well, congratulations, Martin. No one's saying it's not, so...
Thank you very much, Councillor Lamb.
Yes. Yes. Yes, yeah. Well, he's moving up in the world, and I think we get another opportunity before Mr. Feeney retires. So, but I was personally delighted that Martin got the role, and we'll miss David deeply, but couldn't have a better replacement. So, and now normal service is resumed. So, apologies in advance, as every chance that this could turn into a rant interspersed with some questions. So, I think the. Oh, sorry, someone else is sending.
Dropping Martin another job.
Yes. So this makes me pretty angry to start with. I'm frustrated. I'm not angry and frustrated with our officers. You're just presenting the facts to us. It's no one in this room that I'm angry and frustrated with, but the process is an issue. One challenge I would make to our officers is I don't think it's our job as a council to presume or assume, which has been said several times, what the government is or isn't trying to do with this. I think our position should be what's the practical effect of what they're saying and what's our response to it. So that would be the one challenge I would make to you. It worries me if we're trying to guess. We've tried to second guess governments many times of all colours of what we think they're trying to do, and then what actually happens is a very different matter. I'm not sure they entirely know what they're always trying to do. So where's the start? But I think where we can all agree is we'd like to see more houses delivered, and we'd like to see more affordable housing delivered in particular. And I suspect that is what the government would like to do as well. The problem, and I think where we need to start in our response, is the fact they've completely misdiagnosed why that isn't happening. And it seems to be, the suggestion seems to be, the entire problem with house building is down to the planning system. And I reject that. It doesn't mean the planning system doesn't need some improvements, and it couldn't be sped up, and it couldn't be less frustrating for a lot of people on all sides of things. It absolutely could. But it is a matter of fact that there are 1.3 million houses with planning consent in England and Wales already, and the planning system is delivering 300,000 more every year. So within a 5-year period, that gives you a supply of 2.8 million homes, and the government's target is to deliver 1.5 million. So it seems pretty obvious to me the problem in the supply of land is not the planning system. And I think we should be really strong in our response about that. That's not to say there aren't improvements to be captured, but it's if suddenly that 300,000 becomes 600,000 a year, are we suddenly going to see more houses delivered? I don't think so. When it comes to viability, the issue around viability is what is a reasonable margin for mainly volume house builders to make. Because some of us would say when they've got a large site, actually it would be better to cap or to put a floor on the amount they could make rather than saying it needs to be 25, 30, 35%. Yeah, maybe if you're building 5 houses, you need to make that margin. If you're building 1,500 houses on a 25, 30, 35%, you can make a lot of money on an 8 or 10% margin. And that's the problem with viability. And I think one of the responses I'd put to this is there's an awful lot of vagary in here. And if we could revisit the issue of viability assessments, what you described as the exceptions didn't sound like they applied to Greenbelt to me. And my concern with this is actually what will happen is there will be a nice Greenbelt site, and the viability response will be, but you need us to build a road. So the cost of the road is going to be this many millions, and therefore there's no way we can deliver 50% affordable housing. Or you need us to deliver a really fancy green energy solution for that site, and that's going to be very expensive, so we definitely can't deliver 50% affordable housing on that site. And everything that runs through this seems to say, if there's any kind of mitigation that would stop it happening, you need to overrule it. The presumption's in favour, and if there's anything, whether it's viability, whether it's infrastructure, whatever it is, you've got to build it. And that's what reads through it. And some people will say that's the right thing, but let's call a spade in this circumstance. That's what it's saying. Build. And the other bit, and I'll shut up then, because there's probably some questions in here somewhere, is around energy and infrastructure in the green belt again, where it seems pretty clear what it's saying is if somebody wants to build a battery energy storage solution, if they want to build a data centre, if they want to build a big warehouse for a trader, that should be given permission wherever it is. That's what this is saying. And yes, we focus on the protections around green belt, grey belt where it comes to housing. It seems to me there is no protection when it comes to infrastructure. Like pretty much wherever you want to put one of those, a solar farm, whatever it may be, green belt, previously, the green belt protections are gone under this NPPF. They're pretty meaningless. And so there's some really strong concerns, about the very principle of what's being proposed here, that the planning process is the reason house building isn't at the level that has arbitrarily been decided is needed. I'm not actually seeing an evidence base to say why, and I would criticise the last government in the same. There's numbers plucked out of thin air about what the housing need is. In terms of specific questions for it, have we done any assessment of which of our policies would suddenly have very limited weight under this? Because I suspect there's going to be a lot. And the final point is this is taking democracy out of development. It's taking democracy out of how communities and cities, towns, villages are shaped. And that is not a good thing. And I think we should be strongly resisting that in our response. So, sorry, a lot in there, and there were probably some questions, but that's my view on what we should be putting in.
Thank you, Councillor Lamb. I think a lot of that is noted. I won't respond to it each in turn. I think in terms of the question you raised about local policies, no, we haven't done that work in detail. And I think the presentation and the report highlights those areas where we think, certainly through the proposed local plan, we may need to rescope the plan or remove those elements. We haven't done the detailed work of the existing local plan yet. We'll be going through that as soon as we can. As you know, we've got a lot of policies in Leeds. I think, obviously, we also still need to, this is still in draft. We need to still see the final adopted version too. But yeah, we anticipate there will be a significant number of local policies that will have very limited weight. But no, we haven't done that work yet, but it is a priority moving forward.
You want to come back, Councillor Lamb?
Just one quick final question I forgot to ask. What's the difference between a rules-based approach and a plan-led approach? My interpretation is the difference is who's making the rules.
I think that's probably fair. I think ultimately it's about a national, as set out in the draft, national decision making and local decision making. The intention. I mean, I don't want to say the intention of government too many times, but it's clear that what they're trying to set out here is a streamlined system that will apply across local authorities. I think whether we used rules-based, plan-based, I wouldn't disagree, but clearly they couldn't call it plan-based if it was in the NPPF because it's not a local plan. So I think that's really why they're using that term rules-based.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson.
Just a couple of questions. One on paragraph 23 of the report, another one on paragraph 24 of the report. In terms of paragraph 23 of the report, in your response to the consultation, are you going to ask for further clarification as to whether or not that is their intention to give exemptions for affordable housing and that? And secondly, where and at what distance away should the money be spent? You know, in other words, you generate it in one area, and if you're spending it in another area, what you're going to do, because it could be, for example, in the city centre, that's where we need the affordable housing. And if it's and if the site's coming in at say 35, for example, the developer can say no, I want to claim this exemption. And where would you then build that affordable housing? Because you then got to get a site which might be unviable in the first when you come to assess it. So if we can get clarity when you're asking for that question, you can give me an answer just now if you want, but I don't suppose you've got an answer. And then the other one in paragraph 24, can you clarify, not you, to get clarification from the government, but the effect it's going to have on neighbourhood plans? Because by reading between the lines here, they're being diluted. That's my implication as to what it says here. Is that what they really mean? And if that is the case, what are the council going to do to try and get in touch with all the neighbourhood plan groups to make suggestions how they can beef up their neighbourhood plan at a minimum cost? Otherwise, you'll get people objecting to something saying, our neighbourhood plan says no, and you press the beeper and the beep says no, that's not valid anymore. People say, well, what's the point of having a neighbourhood plan? So can we just get clarification of what the government actually mean by that interpretation? And if it is a strict interpretation, can you undertake to carry out consultation with neighbourhood plan groups as a matter of urgency? One, to let them know what the implication is going to be, and secondly, what steps they can take to try and beef up their neighbourhood plan at as minimum cost as possible.
If I take the second question first, if that's okay, Councillor Anderson. It wasn't my intention through that paragraph, and apologies if I've just not phrased it particularly well, to suggest that the new NPPF kind of reduces the role of neighbourhood plans. I think in many ways the purpose of that paragraph was to highlight that there is a new role for a local plan must do, according to the draft, to set out a housing requirement for a designated neighbourhood plan area. And that's a responsibility on the local plan. Inevitably, though, as I think I understand what you're saying in terms of the impact on local authorities in terms of planning policies and the weight to be given to them, inevitably also would apply to neighbourhood planning policies too. I'm not sure I've seen the detail on whether that's been explicitly said that is the government's intention, so we'll certainly either try and understand that myself.
Ask for clarification.
Yeah, and ask for that clarification. Yeah. I think we can. We've got a very good relationship with neighbourhood plans and plan making groups, and I think we'll, particularly being led by Ian Mackay, as you know, Councillor Anderson, and I know in his discussions with local groups, he'll be kind of raising the importance, of them, understanding this area, but also responding to the consultation as well on their own behalf. So I can certainly pick that up with Ian and see if there's anything more comprehensive we can do. But my reading would be that they would be impacted the same way that local authorities will be, unless they adopt policies after the new NPPF, and then they will get full weight. In terms of the first question, we can certainly see clarification. I don't. My reading of it is that they do want to give a kind of dispensation to those medium-sized sites to only provide off-site contributions. But I think we can certainly get some clarification on the second part of your question, which was how does it actually work? How far away can those contributions be allowable? Does the same system that works today still apply? Or is it some kind
That's
of
what my concern is, that they should, in the example, they should maybe give, say, £3 million towards affordable housing, but they say, oh no, I can't afford that, I'll only give you 200,000 instead. And fine, we've got to either, as a plans panel, either accept or reject that depending on the circumstances. But the fact is, we do need the affordable housing. That's why we put the figure of 35% in the outer areas, is because that's what we want. And developers coming along and saying, as Councillor Lamb says, well, you can have this or you can have that. Which do you want? Well, actually, we need both of them. And if the site's not viable, why are you building it in the first place? Why are you bringing it forward if you cannot meet the minimum standards, which is decent accessibility, and they know the 35%. Before they even apply, they know that's what they're going to do. And why are we allowing them to get away with arguing that?
Councillor Stables, you've got a question?
Thank you. I was going to pick up on both those points that Councillor Anderson has picked up on. Actually, I'm extremely concerned by the points that have just been made. Actually, about in outer areas of Leeds, how are we going to ensure we get any affordable housing? So, for example, if we get medium-sized developments, if the developers know that by building medium-sized developments up to 49 houses each time, they can not have to put any affordable housing into that location and it can be put elsewhere, how are we going to ensure in our local plan that that's not going to be the case, that we are going to get affordable housing in all the areas of Leeds that we need it, so including in the outer areas where we are already struggling to get affordable housing because the developers are using viability as their argument. So the change in the MPPF in that paragraph 24, I think that's extremely concerning in terms of impact of that. And my second question was also actually about the neighbourhood plan, and the question was just very specifically, how do you think this change to the MPPF will impact neighbourhood plans? Do you currently, with the information that's before you, think that there is an impact on the neighbourhood plan, and what is that?
Thank you, Councillor Stables. With regard to the neighbourhood planning issue, I think it will almost entirely depend on the kind of emphasis and focus of a neighbourhood plan. And I think actually, in some ways, I can certainly see an argument that the new MPPF would support neighbourhood plans that focus on a lot of design-related issues. I think those style of neighbourhood plans are likely to find almost enhanced weight through this process, because there's clear support in the draft text about the importance of high quality design, and where that's not the case, it should be refused. I think where inevitably for any plan, be it a neighbourhood plan or a local plan, if it contains policies that contradict what's in the MPPF, then they are going to be given very limited weight. And that's going to be an impact across all types of plans. Sorry, that's a bit of a woolly answer, but I think it will come down to what the focus of that neighbourhood plan is. And I wouldn't want to second guess, because it could be different for different neighbourhood plans. But I don't see any inherent reason why neighbourhood plans, provided they write policies that are in accordance with the MPPF, wouldn't be given strong weight in decision making.
Just come back on that point, sorry. Do you think that's a change, though? Because my understanding was previously that there was clearly a hierarchy in terms of decision making. So MPPF, then local plan, then neighbourhood plan. So is it really a change in that? Wasn't it the case previously that if the neighbourhood plan wasn't in agreement, wasn't in accordance with the MPPF, that it wouldn't be given due weight anyway? Is there a change?
I think I'll take it away, I think, is the first response to Councillor Stables, because I think there are sort of fineries to the neighbourhood plan stuff that I'm not going to pretend I've completely got my head around. So I'll take that away and get back to you. My initial response, though, is that a lot of the weight that's given to a neighbourhood plan is related to its status as part of the development plan, and that's conferred by law, not by the MPPF. So I don't see, unless colleagues disagree, I don't see a particular reason why suddenly their status has been affected by this. And talking to colleagues who are closer to neighbourhood planning, they didn't feel that these changes represented a significant step change for neighbourhood plans. And Martin was going to come in on the affordable housing issue.
Thanks, Adam. I think the general point to make, Councillor Stables, is that there is still a need to create a strategic picture of development and needs within the district, and that falls to the Leeds local plan to do that. It now does that against a different context with the MPPF, but it still has a role to shape development and apply those policies to Leeds through its plan. And the 10% for SME developers is a policy in the MPPF for plan making, not a decision making policy. So it's advocating that you allocate at least 10% of your land to small and medium enterprises, and that once done, these sites could have the option of bringing forward their affordable housing through an off-site contribution. But there is still a need to be met within lots of our outer settlements, which doesn't have to be met through this 10% SME route. So, and so the strategic picture of that and how that looks is still a role for the local plan to play. So whilst we need to think about how the MPPF now fits with the ambitions of the Leeds local plan that we previously set out last summer, there's an alignment there to be done and some clarity to be given to local people and neighbourhood groups about, well, what does this mean for what you were saying to us last summer?
Thank you. I'm still not clear, though, how we would, in our local plan, how do we ensure that we still get affordable housing? Because developers will decide on the size of development that they put forward.
I think that's my point, not necessarily. Against this new context, it strikes me that the City Council should be deciding the right size of sites to provide for the needs that it is aware of within each settlement across the city. And if that means the 10% for SME doesn't go in a particular outer area settlement, then so be it. But we do need to make sure that we've got at least 10% of sites for SMEs elsewhere within the city.
So I've just come back and say, of course, that wouldn't be the case on the border in North Yorkshire, which is still going to be the same thing, where SMEs are going to come in and put in forward sites, which don't have to put affordable housing in, unless you are able to work with North Yorkshire to ensure that isn't the case.
Yeah, I mean, taking the site specifics out of that, I think the local plan would need to make sure that development was comprehensive, and it was the right level of development for the right place, taking account of the land, the accessibility. Sometimes it might lend itself to a smaller scheme of less than 49 homes. Other times, in order to get the true benefits from that scheme, we might need something a little larger, and certainly developers who are providing, say, 50% affordable housing may wish that site to start at around a 75 home threshold, in which case it wouldn't be picking up these provisions within the MPPF.
Okay, we've got Councillor Campbell and then Councillor Lamb.
Right, bear with me, I've got a few. I think we've touched on it slightly with Wetherby, but it affects us as well, and that's about the effect or what controls is the wrong word. What constraints can we put on neighbouring authorities who may allow developments in Greenbelt, etc., which materially affect us? The second question is a bit of an extension of that, because though we don't actually have a railway station in Otley, we have one in Menston, which is just over the border. Now, that presumably would a station outside the borders of Leeds, albeit on the border, be one of those with the sort of 15-minute walk criteria. So for Menston, for example, could you develop in Otley because you can walk to Menston Station? That's the simple. I was slightly concerned about the reference to what you appeared to say in relation to the potential green belt developments, and about viability. And you appeared to imply, and I hope you didn't, but perhaps you did, that we as a council should probably set a hierarchy. And I worry about setting a hierarchy because actually, effectively, what that means is if we've got a 10-point list, 8, 9 and 10 never get done because we can never do that. And though we do emphasise the point about affordable housing, rightly so, a number of our other policies I think are as important. And I note that if Homes England, for example, are prepared to support development through a grant, they insist it's fully policy compliant. But this would appear to say that that's not necessarily true for Greenbelt. I'd be interested to understand what the phrase adverse effects substantially outweigh benefits. That's at point 14, because I think that's, how long's a piece of string? And I would also say I think we ought to comment that we'd like to retain the sequential test because it's been very effective in Leeds to retain commercial development in particular within town centres or district centres, and it hasn't meant, as it's meant in a number of other authorities, where retail in particular drifts out to a large outer centre site, which becomes in itself a destination. So I would ask that we could, if we can phrase our comments to retain that. Para 37 talks about identifying sites for renewables. I'd be interested to know how we intend to do that, because presumably it picks up on Alan's point in relation to whereabouts will we say you could put a wind farm or you could put a set of solar panels. And I know that we're going to have to do that. So I think we need to be clear as to what the criteria is. Paragraph 56 talks about encouraging active travel where connectivity is high. And then it refers to a national connectivity tool. What in heaven's name is a national connectivity tool? And how would you define that connectivity is high? I've got a question that picks up about the smaller sites. We have in the past seen developers, when we had the 10 rule for affordable housing, we have seen developers split sites on several occasions actually. So is there any mechanism, or does there appear to be any mechanism that prevents a developer buying a large site and then splitting it into 40 units? I suppose my other question is, if the discussions around the NPPF carry on for some time, will we as a council be penalised for not getting our local plan review process through because of that delay?
I'll take your first and last questions, Councillor Gamble. So you talk about cross-boundary collaboration. That used to be enshrined by something in law called the duty to cooperate. That has now been set out of law, that's been taken out of law, and that's been put into the NPPF. So there is now a requirement to collaborate and cooperate between local authorities. And that, again, the nature of that will, I suggest, change when the spatial development strategy begins in earnest by the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. But for now, we have the duty to cooperate enshrined in the MPPF, and we are using that to have active and ongoing conversations with our neighbours in North Yorkshire about their progressing local plan and the implications that that might have on the settlements that bound it.
Sorry to just interrupt you there, because we talked about effectively the West Yorkshire spatial, but actually will there be similar requirements in relation to the North Yorkshire version of that document?
Yes. And just on the impacts of the MPPF on the Leeds local plan progress and whether there'll be any penalties, if it's okay, I will maybe leave that to the next agenda item, because that hopefully become clear then. Thank you.
Shall I just pick up the remainder, if that's okay? Councillor Campbell, you asked whether it would apply to land surrounding Menston. Yes, depending on how the government are intending this phrase reasonable to be interpreted. Our understanding is that a train station that's outside of Leeds but very close to the border could include, if you draw a circle around it, would include land that could be within Leeds. I think it'd have to be a fairly big circle to get within, to get to Otley, to still be counted as a reasonable walking distance. But
you can walk to the border of Otley from Benson Station in 5 minutes. I'm talking about the border. I mean, the centre of Otley. Yeah, I think you're probably stretching it a bit.
Fair enough. Yeah,
there's plenty of green space between Otley.
Yes, absolutely. Just as another example, there's Appley Bridge as well, which is in Bradford, but its land does extend to the Leeds Authority. So Menston wouldn't be the only example. There's another one that we'd be aware of too. I'm not aware of any other examples, but yeah, I think you are right, Councillor Campbell, that land around Menston Station, in theory, with this policy, would be supported. In terms of the adverse effects outweigh benefits, I mean, I think this is about applying weight in decision making. As you'll know better than me on city plans, you are being tasked with understanding the weight of the benefits of a scheme against its adverse impacts. I think in that they're trying to make very clear that those adverse impacts are going to have to weigh very heavily to be able to counteract the positive benefits of it. Absolutely note your comment on the sequential test. We will reflect those in the response. I think from my personal point of view, I think it would be beneficial to get clearer guidance on how we should be applying it consistently. It can be quite an operation, I think, working out the scope of sequential tests if you don't have a clear policy. We do have a clear policy in Core Strategy P8. So I think it's just about understanding whether is it the government's intention that we retain a clear guidance on what catchments a sequential test should be, or whether that should come down on a case-by-case basis. Because if it does come down to a case-by-case basis, that will take a lot of officer time and applicant time too to negotiate that. In terms of identifying areas for renewables, so just to reiterate, we're not required to identify sites, we're required to identify areas. We've already done this work through Local Plan Update 1. We've already consulted on it. So we did assessment work for land around Leeds for both solar and wind, and consulted on maps that show that. What we've done, and we can review it, but I think the basis for it is still sound, is it's based on constraints. So how close do you come to listed buildings, conservation areas, sites of special scientific interest, essentially biodiversity or heritage features that need to be protected from development, and then you apply constraint layers around them. and you gradually build up a picture of the land that doesn't have constraints that may be suitable. What's interesting, I think, through the new draft is that previously, in a couple of versions ago of the NPPF, if you weren't within an opportunity area, there was almost no chance of a scheme being approved. It seems to be quite significantly relaxed now that even if you're not within an opportunity area, there's still a series of tests that could be passed to allow development. So it'll be interesting to see how that applies in practice. And whether that is the government's intention or not. The National Connectivity Tool. It's a very powerful tool that essentially breaks down the entire country. Developed by Department for Transport, and it scores every. I think is it just a hex? It's a small geographic area anyway that's scored out of 100 for connectivity. Across sort of public transport modes and walking modes, and very few reach 100, as you can imagine. I think we found a few in central London, but that's your absolute sort of peak connectivity. And so, you get a range across the whole city and across the whole country scored against its connectivity. My understanding that tool is now public, which is helpful, because I think one of our concerns was that it wasn't public to start with, and then it therefore wasn't transparent if we were going to use it. But now we are. I think my reading of it is that we are required to use it, and everyone can see. So it's a level playing field. Everyone can see what that score is. But you're going to score better if you're within walking distance of, social infrastructure, doctors, health centres, schools, parks, jobs, town centres. Those kind of things are going to score well. So in many ways, I don't think it's a huge move away from our complete, compact, connected assessment. But the real focus there is on its transport connectivity, which is an element that we didn't have as rich a data set. So I think it's helpful in that regard. I think that was everything. Sorry if it wasn't.
I was just going to say, don't think you covered the splitting sites.
Oh,
that's all right. I mean, I can do that if you want. Yeah. Yes, I mean that is a danger, and that would be one that we would seek to, through the local plan, understand. As I say, there's an optimum size of site, so we'd look to allocate that optimum size of site around settlements, and express caution if two sites next to each other came through a speculative route.
Can I just quickly to come back on that one. So in effect, the local plan will allocate sites. The revised local plan will allocate sites. They will be of different sizes. So are you actually saying that if we happen to have two sites adjacent to each other, both of which theoretically would take 40, we'd actually regard that as an 80? Right. Okay.
Okay, I've got Councillor Lamb, then Councillor Anderson, then Councillor Stables.
Thank you, Chair. Just expanding on a couple of the points Councillor Stables made, and then Councillor Campbell. So the question around how do we get affordable housing in outer areas, and the answer that immediately came to my head, which has stuck the more I've thought about it, is that will be the developer rationale for releasing Greenbelt. Because they will say it's not viable to build on your brownfield sites, therefore you have to give us Greenbelt, because that's the only way you're going to get affordable housing in those particular areas. So that's a concern. I think that's the response that comes from it. On the points made about small sites, and Councillor Campbell got to the right place on that. I think effectively this does nothing to stop Trojan sites, which we are seeing increasingly, where one small site that in and of itself doesn't seem that harmful comes forward. Everybody knows it's part of a much bigger plan, and how through this do you secure proper master planning for those sites, so it's not a site for 50, where as soon as there's a number, it used to be the same, 9 was the trigger for affordable houses, or 10 was, so, well, we'll build 9 houses then. If you put a trigger arbitrarily at 49, we're going to see lots of developments of 48 houses, because that will suddenly change what you need to deliver. And one of your responses worried me a little bit, Martin, actually. I think it highlighted the flaw in this, that you said, but the local plan will do this, this and this. The problem inherently in this is very explicitly the rules-based central government rules always trump the local plan policies now, and those central rules can change at a stroke with a ministerial statement. If we want to change a policy, we have to go through an 18 months or 3-year process to do it. And so if something happens nationally that we have to respond to, then there's a huge disconnect between those two things. And the final small point is there is far too much subjective language in this, as has been highlighted throughout the table, that gives me no comfort whatsoever, because you're open to, everyone's going to sit, all this will come in, we wait for the first round of appeals to go in around the country and see how an inspector interprets that subjective language, and that will become the policy approach. There's too much in here that we don't actually know what it means until it's been tested in practice, and they need to tighten the language. We still might not like the language, but at least you know where you stand. At the moment, I think there's too much of this where it's open to interpretation, and that is not a healthy place to be.
I think you're right, and I think the ambition to make it rules-based is to make it easier to understand, easier to front-load, and easier for both investors and local communities to understand what they're likely to see within their areas. And that has to be the ambition still of the Leeds local plan. Just on affordable housing, your concerns about the golden rules and the up to 50% affordable housing being used as a reason to bring sites forward. That's something that we're grappling with through the local plan at the moment, and is something that I think we've discussed in this forum previously. But we have to remember that we've got a strategic housing market assessment that sets local need. So if the ambition of the City Council through its plan is to meet that need and look at the potential sites available to meet that need. So that would avoid a spatial strategy that you're sort of concerned about, which is purely affordable housing driven, and the ability to secure affordable housing driven. That's not the plan that the City Council put in front of people last summer, where there was an awful lot of emphasis on brownfield land, the city centre, and transport corridors. And I don't think the MPPF in this iteration necessarily, destabilises that ambition of the City Council. Was there another question? Did I answer both of them? I think I did.
Okay, I've got Councillor Anderson next.
Just paragraph 46. Is this back to RSS version 2, 3, 4 or 5, where Martin and I first crossed swords together? That goes back some time. But, in other words, if West Yorkshire Combined Authority are of a view that there should be a Greenbelt boundary review between two constituent authorities in order to meet housing targets, how are we going to deal with that?
So to be clear, at the moment, we don't have an SDS, and the Combined Authority don't have planning powers to prepare an SDS yet. That is coming. So this guidance is in place to guide them when they are set up to do so. What will happen is the Leeds local plan, which has already started its journey, will continue with a full range of strategic and non-strategic policies within it, including, if appropriate and with exceptional circumstances, making alterations to its Greenbelt boundary right the way up to the early 2040s. This document, the MPPF revision, does set out that part of SDSs may be around looking at the review of the Greenbelt. What that looks like is difficult to tell now, given that we know as a city council what's in our Leeds local plan and responding to those needs. We can't really preempt what those needs look like for West Yorkshire moving forward for the next 20 years. So I suspect the question will be one which will need to be sort of flushed out, but I suspect the impact of it is certainly next plan review, not this plan making process, Councillor.
I mean, I agree with that, because it just seems peculiar. We're now in the point of the electoral cycle where we've got a Labour government and we're going to probably have different control of councils throughout the country. And that was the same problem with the RSS, is that the government were setting the policy nationally, and because different councils had different political control locally, they found it very difficult to comply with policies that they don't agree with, which led to all sorts of problems. So as I say, when you and I first met, the arguments that used to go on between Leeds wanting to do one thing and other authorities wanting to do something different, I can just see this being a recipe for disaster if we do end up with SDSs getting a lot of teeth. If the government don't give them teeth, I'm satisfied. But I think if they give them teeth, we're going to have one hell of a battle ahead of ourselves.
Councillor Stables.
Thank you. I'm going back to paragraph 37, which sets out that the local plan should identify areas suitable for renewable energy. It doesn't, again, that's very vague. Are there specific targets that each local authority will be given in terms of how many, of what type? Any more information on that?
No, in short. So it's not much of a shift from the current position, to be fair. There already is a requirement in national policy to kind of identify renewable energy areas, and there isn't a target at the moment. And that doesn't massively change. So there isn't a national target and there isn't a local target. We used to have one through the old discussion about the RSS did identify a target, and it may be that through that process that something does emerge, but right now no, there isn't a target. And as I say, I think such. We shouldn't assume that if we include an area within those sort of opportunity areas, as we called them, that they're guaranteed to come forward. There'll be a lot of market factors and detailed site energy capacity factors that a local plan isn't going to be able to go into the details of for every parcel of land. So we shouldn't assume that everything's going to come forward. It's more a helpful starting point to say, look, if you are going to look at delivering renewable energy, these are the areas that you would gain policy support for doing so, and this should be your first port of call, essentially. But no, we don't have targets.
Councillor Brooks.
Thanks, Chair, and sorry for having my coat on. I'm freezing. I am staying, at least for a bit longer. Yeah, I'm still a bit puzzled around the viability side of things. I think it's 73. It says to mitigate land price inflation, the policy states that overpaying for land should not justify failure to meet plan policy. And the policy encourages decision makers to consider using review mechanisms to seek policy compliance. I'm kind of unclear as to how that would play out, really. And it was touched on earlier, but I'm still not clear in my mind as to how it'd work. Because certainly, like we've heard quite a lot about the outer areas and how viability can impact on there and Greenbelt release and things like that, but the inner area, the vast majority of development has come forward from the inner area, and most of that development has been on, if not all of that development has been on brownfield, so there's quite a lot of costs involved in that. So yeah, just to make sure that we're looking at it from both of those point of view, really. Thank you.
No, you're quite right, Councillor Brooks, and the route to addressing those concerns is through an economic viability study as part of the Leeds local plan. The council are about to commission further evidence on the EVS to look at a number of things, including the state of the market, and also the state of the operators and investors within the market, because there are significantly more products in terms of housing products available to us now than there were when the core strategy was written, and they often have different funding mechanisms and attract different funding regimes, which all need to be taken into account as part of the planning process. What that EVS will do is it will look at the costs of development against that sort of updated market assessment, and it will also look at the costs that policies place on development. Now, that will come from a number of places. It will include some national costs, such as things like the building safety levy and biodiversity net gain, which is mandatory, and it will also include some discretionary local costs, such as our targets for affordable housing and our green space contributions and transport contributions, etc. We can't write policies that a development is unreasonably able to achieve. So a development, the point here is to secure the right supply of land for housing and economic growth and commercial growth. So if we place too many burdens through our policies on that development, we simply won't see it come forward. So as it's always been, it's a balancing act, but we are at a point with this new guidance and a new local plan coming down the line to be able to look at that afresh. And certainly, as we go through that process, we will bring development plan panel along with us in terms of the assumptions that are being made and some of the initial responses that we get from both any sort of early consultation with the development industry. So hopefully that helps address your question, because there will, in that work, there will be a need to pick up the fact that some of those viability pressures look very different to a city centre site, for example, than they do to a site in the Greenbelt.
Do you want to come back, Councillor Brooks?
Yeah, thank you. I think you've partially answered my question, but I suppose it's this: the policy states that overpaying for land should not justify failure to meet plan policy bit. Like, is that, I can't see how that's going to be sort of not enforced. Yeah, I guess enforced, because like, as a local planning authority, we don't have the power to say you've paid too much. So I'm very unclear as to how it's going to be.
So if I could help, one of the things that I think it would be really important for us to enshrine is an approach that's open and transparent, so that the inputs that developers are putting into their costs and their schemes are ones which can be scrutinised and understood. Because if we aren't getting the benefits that we're seeking, such as affordable housing, there need to be really clear reasons as to why not. And the second thing is, it would be really important to set out, because the market is so dynamic and it changes year on year, and certainly has done very recently, not just looking at 5-year market cycles, almost looking at sort of yearly market cycles, how to get the best out of development when in between, when permission's granted and potentially there are viability reasons given, and any clawback that might be appropriate when development commences. So there's lots of things that we need to secure, write down, because if it's written down, it's helpful, because developers and investors can certainly take that into account when they bid for land, and we would always encourage developers to make appropriate bids for land which take into account the policy burdens that they will have to deliver.
Thank you very much, Councillor Finnegan.
Just to develop that theme a little further, because this is an inner and an outer issue, because whether it's Councillor Brooks's concerns that what little affordable housing they get at this point disappears altogether because the developers overpaid for a site, and certainly in our outer areas it's the same discussion about, here we are, we think this is grey belt but we can't afford 50% housing or whatever, 50% affordable housing or whatever, primarily because they've overpaid for a site on the basis that they can probably wangle out of their obligations on it. When it says to mitigate land price inflation, the policy states that overpaying for land should not justify failure to meet plan policy. Who decides? Who decides whether they have overpaid for that land? And is it you? Is it the Secretary of State? Who is it? Because all the developers will say, well, that was a market price at that point. It all seems a bit of a sham process to make sure Councillor Brooks gets shafted in the inner and I get shafted in the outer. What concrete processes are there that make sure that we end up, Councillor Brooks ends up with no affordable housing and we end up with nothing more than 15%, which is what we get at this point?
So there is a methodology and a process for applying viability assessments to developments, and they rely on a benchmark land value, which can change over time, but which is monitored, and we will rely on the information that we get from our viability consultants and our experts, who are currently the district valuer and the valuation office, to provide us with that detail and their tracking of transactions that occur within the city. So we're able to make a reasonable assessment in terms of what the right value of the land is at a particular point in time.
Just to rebut that slightly, this point, if they're just looking around, if everybody's over, if developers, as a result of speculation, are overpaying for sites, then that becomes the market price, doesn't it? There's no way of saying, well, right, you paid £1 million for that site. It was actually worth half of that. How do we have a process that actually cuts down to make sure that that's not the case? Because the whole developer charade is about speculation and about making as much money as possible, certainly from the volume house builders anyway. And I can't see how the district valuer is saying, yeah, you paid £1 million for that because that was the price of all of these sites during the period that we're looking at. That was the market price. Well, the market price might have been fiddled or distorted anyway. So how do you get around that distortion? If it's distorted in the first place, then that becomes normal and the distortion just continues and we all end up getting shafted, don't we? Or have I missed something? Is there some way of saying that site you overpaid for? Not based upon market conditions or when you bought it, because if everybody's playing the same game, all of those values are inflated anyway. How do you get rid of that inflation of land values that is one of the reasons we're not delivering A, the amount of housing that we should do, and B, the amount of affordable housing we should be doing?
So I think, if it's okay, Councillor Finnegan, and I'm sure other members of the panel will be interested in this as well, I think probably a note, because it is quite a technical subject, and I think there's quite a technical answer here. But I think that the paper in front of you today, in terms of the MPPF changes, do recognise some of the concerns that you have around viability, and the tools that local authorities have to be able to require things like affordable housing off the back of schemes. But I'm happy to get someone to put down in a note for you and share with the rest of the panel members the answer to your question in technical detail.
Councillor Campbell.
You'll be pleased to know I'm getting near the end. Just quickly to pick up on that, I was going to ask a question about the the annexes and the viability, could you also get somebody to put a couple of paragraphs together about how we might now assess a site? So, in relation to viability and green belt, that evaluation. Yeah. All right, just a couple of paragraphs just to explain how we might do it. Okay, can I just touch on 59 and 60, which are promoting healthy communities. And it says, it talks about this subject that we're constantly bombarded with, which is in relation to schools, doctors, dentists. And it seems to, it talks about attaching considerable importance to providing sufficient. Is the implication that developers will provide sufficient, or that the local authority, through maybe a levy or something, assists in providing sufficient? And it also talks about, in 59, so I'll get them both in, a hot food takeaway policy, which you say closely echoes our current policy in Leeds, but it says without comparable clarification. Could we suggest to government that they might like to adopt ours as it's well, it's not perfect, but it's certainly better than we had before we had one anyway.
I think the hot food takeaways one is a good example of where it would be good practice to have a national position and a local position at the same time, because the national position has established the principle. What the local policy currently does, and I hope will do, is set out clearly where it applies and where it doesn't apply, based on Leeds-based factors of where schools are and where hot food takeaways are. And that's the kind of detail that we've got, and that national government can never have. So that's I think a real role of, that's the kind of the detail and the clarification that we can provide. I think in terms of the provision of community facilities, certainly including health infrastructure, it is certainly something that we're going to go back to, seeking further clarification on, Councillor Campbell, because I think it's working closely with colleagues in the NHS, trying to improve our systems for kind of delivering infrastructure as part of new developments, and as through the local plan. It's clear that there are significant challenges in the way that our current systems work to the delivery of infrastructure on the ground, and the way that, say, GPs' practices are funded based on patients, does make this challenge quite difficult to solve. So I think it's kind of incumbent on us to sort of set out perhaps some examples of how it works at the moment, because in reality, the way that the current kind of NHS facilities are provided, a developer isn't going to be able to just decide to put a doctor's surgery on a site. That's clearly going to have to work through some very different mechanisms outside the planning system for that to work. So it requires a lot of joined up thinking, which is clearly no bad thing, but perhaps goes back to some of Councillor Lamb's earlier points, that the planning system is perhaps a part of this discussion, but in other elements there are clearly work that needs to go on way beyond the planning system to solve some of these challenges that we all agree need to be solved. So yeah, we'll go as part of our response, try and provide some further clarification and some examples of how we think that's currently operating in Leeds, by way of example.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that, because though theoretically the health service has the right to comment on planning applications now, they never seem to do that. And I think it will be useful if government is going to impose requirements on us to do things, that they actually impose a similar requirement on the health providers, to at least have some sort of plan policy in place about where there's a shortage of, say, doctors' facilities, and where developments can contribute to filling that shortage.
Thank you. Do members have any more questions? No? Do officers wish to clarify anything further? No? Lovely. Thank you, members, for, I think, a very well-considered debate. Officers have quite a bit to go away with. I'm conscious of time, but also appreciate that was quite a long item, so I'm just going to call for a 5-minute comfort break just now. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. On to agenda item number 8, Leeds Local Plan.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a item which sets out the implications of the wider changes to the planning system, not just the MPPF, which we've just been discussing in the previous item, but also the continued rolling out of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act. And there has been an intent for some time from both the previous government and the current government to implement the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act as it relates to creating a quicker, clearer and more user-friendly plan-making process. The reforms are set out in para 3 of the report, and they include a 30-month process. They include gateway checks with the planning inspectorate to ensure that local authorities are on the right track. They also include being very digital focused and creating accessible local plans so that local people can very easily understand what's proposed within their area. Now, all of that is well and good, but the current Leeds local plan was being prepared under the previous regulations, the 2012 regulations. The government has now confirmed the draft regulations, 2026 regulations for the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act provisions around plan making. They were released in draft before Christmas at the end of November, and we understand that they intend to be laid before Parliament within the next sort of few weeks. That means that the City Council needs to consider how it proposes moving forward the Leeds local plan, because there are no transition arrangements between the regulations. So unless the City Council submits the Leeds local plan to the Secretary of State by the 31st of December this year, it will have to pivot and shift to the new regulations. Now, we've carried out one substantial public consultation on the Leeds local plan last year. It was extremely successful in terms of attracting nearly 20,000 people making comments, and in total about 45,000 comments. And we need to come and do further consultations. I think ensuring that the right level of consultation is carried out at the right time is critical, so that people have an opportunity to engage with and shape the development that's coming through within their local areas. And in short, in order to secure that we get that level of consultation right, there simply isn't enough time in order to carry out 2 further substantive rounds of consultation before submitting the plan by the 31st of December. So therefore, the proposal in this paper is to pivot the plan to the new plan-making regulations. Now, that has significant benefits. It has more flexibility within it, because if we'd decided to press on and seek to submit by the end of this year, and if something had gone wrong, we'd have lost quite a lot of this year's efforts and had to start from scratch. We are still at a fairly early stage in the Leeds local plan, so pivoting now and moving to the new plan making process will be less substantive a change. The gateway checks are also welcomed because they help de-risk the plan as it gets to plan examination and ultimately speed up the process of plan examination. Members will be aware that at various points in plan making in Leeds, we've spent quite significant months actually at plan making and at examination with the inspectorate. Anything that de-risks that and shortens that is an advantage. And finally, the new MPPF obviously has a key role to play in the Leeds local plan, so this would give us the ability to be able to marry up the Leeds local plan with the provisions of the MPPF, which are still draft and would become adopted national policy at some point this year. Now, what that means to the timetable is set out in para 15 of the report. We had previously committed to come back out to consultation in the summer of this year, and at that point we were hoping to bring draft sites and draft policies. What we're proposing instead is that in the summer of this year we do a further consultation, which is an opportunity to explain and explore with local people what they said to us in the summer last year, what their views were, report back their views, and also confirm the way the plan now looks in light of the MPPF provisions. That would then enable us to move to a proposed plan content and evidence consultation in the autumn and winter of this year, likely sometime in November, where we will have completed our Greenbelt methodology, Greenbelt assessment, which, because of a delay in government guidance, we weren't able to provide to the summer 2025 consultation, alongside other evidence such as the economic viability study, which we've talked about, alongside preferred sites where they are clearly preferred and clearly in line with policy, and a local choice element to that consultation. Because at the moment, when we last went out for consultation, we had around 750 sites. There were an awful lot of sites, and we explained that it was important to subject all of those sites to public consultation. But I think it would be a more meaningful conversation with local people if we could shrink the number of sites down so that they had genuine choices within their local area. That would then mean that consultation on a draft plan would happen in the summer of 2027, with the intent to submit to government autumn-winter of that year, 2027. So whilst there's a delay in terms of submission, it would be highly unlikely for us to be able to achieve that submission this year and ensure that we brought local people with us and had the right level of evidence to support the policies that we want to bring forward. So that new timetable is in front of you for consideration and comment. Thank you.
Councillor Lamb and Councillor Finnegan.
Thank you. I think there's a lot of sense in that. The bit I'd just like some clarification on is what it means on the site assessments and the publication, because there's a real impact of them being sat at the moment. So one example that I've come across in the last week is a piece of land on a public car park that desperately needs resurfacing, and the reason it's not being resurfaced is because it's being considered in the call for sites, and that's one example. So through this, is there an opportunity to, in pretty short order, publish those site assessments and say that's where we're at, so people know there will be an opportunity to consult within this timetable and put further comments, but as things stand, that's the City Council's view. So we do as much as we can within the timetable, rather than holding absolutely everything back, and because that does have real world consequences for lots of people.
Yeah, I'm absolutely conscious of that, and there's a number of examples of that, and I think that's why. I mean, just to comfort you, we are continuing to work behind the scenes very hard to get through that level of site assessment work, and that's the bulk of this really. We consulted on 600 sites. Through that consultation, we've had an additional 150. So in a sense, the job's now got even larger, but absolutely at an appropriate time in the process, I think it would be really important to clarify what sites are in, and also what sites that haven't really got much chance of making it through are out, and that's something we can take away and consider and bring through this group as we provide more detail in terms of what each of the next steps look like.
Councillor Finnegan.
Just to continue that theme really, so when we go out this summer, because last time we went out there was a load of sites, certainly in my area, I'm sure in everybody else's area, that were unrealistic, unachievable, and to a degree it was a good consultation process because people added extra reasons why these sites wouldn't actually work. summer 2026, at that stage, will you have wheedled out a lot of those sites, or are you just going to? Are we going to be back to, traffic light processes, which just make the community overly concerned, primarily because they don't know where they are at all last time, whether it's a green and we're trying our best to explain it. Anybody who's trying to explain that to a public meeting of 300 people, good luck with that. We tried, I'm not saying we succeeded, but ultimately, when it goes out next time, are there going to be fewer sites for them to focus on? Or are you just going to go back with the whole load of sites that we had previously and saying, well, I had another look at this, and this has gone from an amber to a red, or whatever it might be. What they're interested in is what sites are no opers, and what sites they need to focus more closely on, because even in my area, and I'm sure other people's area, they know that ultimately they're going to have to make a decision about that site's a better site than that site. And we can only help and assist them if you wheedle out all of those that were crappy, speculative in the first place. So in summer 2026, when we're going out, we will have those sites that have been kicked out are definitely kicked out. And it's basically, as you were saying, you've the choice of these, you've got to get these numbers, the choice of these sites, which is the least worst, which is the argument I'm having, I'm sure Mary's having, we're all having at this stage. Is that where we're going to be when we go out in summer?
Not quite. And the reason being, and the disadvantage to this is that from a procedural point of view, we will be starting again under a new system. Okay, so we will be applying a new set of regulations to a plan that's already in train. So we have to try to ensure that we maintain good progress on the plan. We don't overly confuse local people. We certainly don't go back and say that summer consultation that you had in 2025, we're going to do that again. But we need to work through what this looks like. So what you're describing sounds to me like it's probably going to be more the November consultation this year than it is the summer consultation this year, with the summer consultation being a step toward that, but certainly letting people know what the conclusion of all of their consultation comments were to those sites that we gave them. The second point to make is the MPPF and the technical guidance that accompanies it gives us a new approach to how to handle site assessments. So we need to take that into account as well. So there's a bit to do, and certainly what we'd like to do is bring more detail on what this looks like to a future DPP, and particularly leaning into the site assessments. And Adam probably has more to say.
Yeah, just on that as well, I think we still need to work it through in terms of the timetable, and a lot of it comes down to when the regs will actually land and what they specifically say for each stage and what we actually legally have to do. But we think we're in a good place to know that. I think what we would like to do for that scoping consultation is a kind of a halfway house from what you described, Councillor Finnegan, as Martin describes, when we get to the autumn consultation, do the full house. I think what's really important is that one of the biggest sources of anxiety that we were coming across last summer's consultation was quite a few people had their land submitted to be considered for development, which, as you can imagine, was causing a lot of anxiety to those people who hadn't promoted it. What we would like to do is essentially show a list of kind of sites that we're properly considering having amended boundaries on the basis of cutting out sites and cutting out land where people have very clearly said to us, whoa, we own that land and we're not considering it to be released for development. With, close to 800 sites, there's a lot of work to get to that point. And there's a lot of sites that have been submitted to us that they're not reasonable sites. Some of them are just simply not available at all. So we'll be aware of some council-owned sites that were submitted by members of the public, but the council aren't promoting. So we know those sites are not going to be available. So I think at that scoping consultation, it would be useful if we can at least show that sort of almost final list of sites for overall consideration that doesn't include those completely irrelevant sites that were just causing a lot of angst but weren't ever going to come forward, to then hopefully be able to progress to that choice-based consultation that Martin describes in the autumn.
Just to come back very briefly on that, a lot of my communities, and I'm sure other communities, felt it was a bogus consultation last time. And unless we show that some of what they've added to the consultation has had some impact. So if you seem to be recycling the same sites in my area and everybody else's area at this point, their faith in the planning process, which is already low, gets even lower. And at that point, they'll just say, well, what's the bloody point? Because it's making not a blind bit of difference. Unless whatever you're going out to in summer 2026 is significantly improved on the basis of new information often that you've learnt about particular sites, and sites are removed. If it just seems like a different shade of the same document, their faith is going to be even more lessened by this particular process. And they thought the last one was bogus. They're going to think this one is even more bogus because you're just recycling the same old stuff that you recycled last time. So it has to be, whatever document you're putting out for consultation has to be definitely significantly different from the last one. And I'm not reassured with what Martin says that it is going to be significantly different. It's going to be the same old stuff recycled.
You raise the key point, Councillor Finnegan, that we have to grapple with. We don't want to make a procedural misstep under the new process. We will be going further than the new Act recommends we go at this stage of the process. So how much further we can go is something that we'll need to, as Adam said, consult the regs when they're finalised, take some advice from the planning inspectorate, and also take some advice from MHCLG. Because from our conversations with MHCLG, they want us to keep cracking on and get this plan adopted as soon as we can. But the route to do that, you're absolutely right. It's not just a procedural issue. It's a how does this look to local people? So we're absolutely conscious of that.
I just wonder, Councillor Finnegan, I think perhaps our role between us as well is that if we consider that consultation to be, yes, a procedural one, but also crucial in almost setting out the timeline for what local people can expect and what you can expect and what conversations you're going to want to have, but when they're likely to happen. And hopefully if we can set that out in terms of what is the process for this plan. Yes, you might see some sites that you've objected to are still in the plan, say in the summer. Come the autumn, there'll be a significant rationalisation of those sites, so you'd expect to see a much lower number of sites. I think if hopefully, and you'll tell me different obviously, but if local people can understand that that's what's going to be coming down the train, hopefully we might be able to work together to be able to engage them better. I think the last thing that certainly officers, I'm sure members too, want to do is just generate the same 40,000 comments that we got last summer. It doesn't serve anybody any good. We've already got them, and we want to. We've already understood them. It would be a waste of everybody's energy if we just did that all over again. So yeah, I think we can perhaps work together across all across DPP to understand how we best avoid that problem.
Councillor Stables.
Thank you. I was going to, I'm going to reiterate a bit of what was just said, but I am really concerned that we clearly, all of us, elected members, worked incredibly hard, I think, last year to get engagement with the consultation, and that's seen in the numbers that came through. And I am just really concerned that people are going to look at this and go, well, what's this about? Why are we doing this again? So what can happen from that? So we might have very, very little engagement. So we could do it on the one hand that, we just put it out low key. We don't actually engage with it very much at all as elected members. And you do it in terms of process. But you know that you're going to get very little engagement, but you tick the box in terms of process if that's what we need to do to achieve it. The danger of getting elected members on board with this and shouting about it and trying to get everybody to engage with it is exactly the point that's been made, that people go, well, what is the point of this? We've done all this before, we've said all this, nothing, we can't see anything significantly has changed, so what is the value in it? And I think if we did that, we'd have to have a really clear objective. You know, what are we trying to achieve from it? What are we wanting the residents to engage with? You know, I can understand there's information give here, and some people are going to be interested in reading. There will be some people that are interested in reading what other people have put, but other than information give, you know, what do we want them to be answering? Because otherwise you've made the point it's the same thing as before, and in which case there's no point really in engaging them. And from our perspective, actually it could be a worse situation we end up in, because we could lose the faith in the general public in terms of what the consultations are for. So we could have it low key and then really go for it in the autumn and go, right, this is the next stage. We want all of you, we want the parish councils to engage in, we want residents to engage in. Maybe we do it that way.
I think, Councillor Stables, that's really helpful. And what we'll do is we'll bring some options to the March DPP meeting in terms of what might be in, what might be out, what it might look like, and what the length and breadth of it would be. Because I think there are a number of different ways we can cut this. But I think the key thing is to keep the local community on board with us, with the plan, and not feel like the comments they made last summer are now irrelevant.
Councillor Hasselwood?
It's okay. It was just on this point because in my ward we've only got 2 sites and they're both controversial and both causing us problems. One in particular, which we've spoken about, which doesn't even have access to it right now. There's not even a road or a path to it or anything. And if we leave that and just sit on it, then it's going to cause a lot of problems in the community. So yeah, just to reiterate, can we make sure that we we do have some answers to go back with, even if it's a 2-stage like that, and we don't leave it till the end of the year, because we really need to get some answers on some of these sites. Yeah.
Any more questions from members? Councillor Lamb?
Yeah, when are we proposing that the 30-month clock will start ticking, or has it already started ticking?
Yeah, it's a good question. The 30-month clock starts ticking after we have done our first gateway check, which is a self-assessment of readiness to prepare the plan. So that's probably going to be after the first scoping consultation. So it would be after the summer consultation, the 30-month clock would start.
So the obvious follow-on to that is that shifts all of the baseline data to that date. So do you have an indication of what that does to the overall housing targets? Because I'm assuming we can't just rely on the housing target we're using at the start of the current process. It will have to be updated to the start of the 30-month period.
Yeah, I mean, the implications of that are that the MPPF sets that upon adoption the plan should have 15 years to run. So we just need to be clear that if we are adding a year on, then we're taking a year off the front end, because at the moment it starts in 2024. Again, that is something that we're looking at the moment, and is something that we can bring back to this panel to discuss. But it's not going to make substantial differences to the numbers, is my understanding.
Great. Any more questions from members? No? Do officers wish to clarify anything further? No? Lovely. I think it's a good idea that we've got March DPP and we bring those options, the documents, the scoping document, in 2 months' time. With that then, agenda item number 9, just to note the date and the time of the next DPP meeting, it will be Tuesday the 17th of March 2026 at 1:30 p.m. That concludes today's business. Thank you for your attendance and all your contributions. I now declare this meeting closed.